The lighthouse still shone through the storm, yet every keeper had disappeared. There were no footprints, no farewell, only silence.
Long before satellites guided ships across the oceans, before radios carried voices through the storm, sailors placed their trust in something far simpler: a single light standing against the darkness. Far out in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, nearly 20 miles from the western coast of Scotland, lies a small cluster of rocky islands known as the Flannan Isles. For most of the year, these lonely cliffs are surrounded by endless waves, drifting mist, and powerful winds that seem to sing through the stone. There are no villages here, no forests, no busy harbors, only the restless sea and silence. To passing sailors, the islands seemed almost untouched by time. By day, thousands of seabirds circled high above the cliffs, their distant calls blending with the endless sound of the ocean. At night, darkness slowly covered the Atlantic, hiding sharp rocks beneath the rolling waves. For countless ships, these waters could become dangerous in a matter of moments. For generations, local fishermen spoke quietly about the islands. Some believed they were sacred. Others simply preferred not to remain there after sunset. Whether those stories were born from old traditions or from the loneliness of the place itself, no one could truly say. But everyone agreed on one thing: the sea around the Flannan Isles deserved respect. As the 19th century drew to a close, more ships than ever before crossed the North Atlantic. Merchant vessels carried goods between distant ports. Fishing boats worked the cold waters. Passenger ships sailed through thick fog and fierce winter storms. Again and again, captains warned that these rocky islands were difficult to see until it was almost too late. Something had to be done. So a decision was made. A lighthouse would be built on the highest point of the largest island, standing watch over the sea every hour of every night. Building it was anything but easy. Every stone, every wooden beam, every piece of heavy machinery had to be carried across rough water before workers slowly hauled them up the steep cliffs. The Atlantic showed little kindness. Powerful waves crashed against the rocks below. Cold rain swept across the island without warning. Strong winds often forced the builders to stop their work for days at a time. Yet little by little, the lighthouse began to rise. When it was finally completed, its tall white tower stood proudly above the endless ocean. Inside, a great lantern waited behind polished glass. Each evening, its powerful beam slowly turned across the horizon, guiding ships safely through the darkness. For sailors far away, that gentle light became a welcome sight. A quiet reminder that someone was awake, watching over the sea. Life inside the lighthouse followed a peaceful rhythm. Every morning, the keepers carefully cleaned the great lantern until every pane of glass sparkled. They polished the brass fittings, checked the fuel, inspected the machinery, recorded the weather in neat handwriting. Every task mattered. Even the smallest mistake could place lives in danger far beyond the horizon. When the work was finished, they listened to the wind, watched the changing sky, and waited for another sunset. Days passed slowly here. Time was measured not by crowded streets or busy clocks, but by the rising sun, the setting light, and the steady heartbeat of the ocean. For those who chose this lonely life, silence became a familiar companion. As another winter quietly approached, 3 experienced lighthouse keepers prepared for what seemed certain to be just another ordinary season. None of them could have imagined, that before the year came to an end, their names would become part of one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries.
The days passed quietly, one after another, almost unchanged. Morning light filled the small rooms of the lighthouse. The keepers rose early. They prepared a simple breakfast. Hot tea, fresh bread, and whatever supplies had arrived on the last relief boat. Afterward, each man returned to his duties. The lantern was cleaned with great care. Every pane of glass had to remain perfectly clear. The great lens was polished until it caught the smallest beam of light. Fuel was checked. Machinery was inspected. Nothing was ever rushed. Out here, far from the mainland, small details mattered. A single forgotten task could place an entire ship in danger. When their work was finished, the island became wonderfully quiet. One keeper might sit near the doorway, watching endless waves roll toward the cliffs. Another would write in the daily logbook. The third might simply listen to the wind moving through the tower. There was no traffic, no crowded streets, no voices drifting through the night. Only the sea, breathing in its slow, endless rhythm. Sometimes the Atlantic was gentle. Sunlight sparkled across the water like scattered pieces of silver. Seabirds floated effortlessly above the waves. For a few precious hours, the world seemed perfectly calm. But the ocean could change its mood without warning. Dark clouds often gathered beyond the horizon. The wind became colder. The waves grew taller. Within minutes, the peaceful sea transformed into a restless giant. The lighthouse stood firm against every storm. Its thick stone walls had been built to endure the worst the Atlantic could offer. Inside, the keepers continued their work with quiet confidence. They had faced storms before, many storms, and they trusted both the tower and one another. Every evening, as daylight slowly faded, the great lantern came alive. Its warm beam swept across the darkness, round and round, hour after hour. Far below, ships searched for that familiar light. To tired sailors, it was more than a lighthouse. It was reassurance, a silent promise that someone was awake, watching over the sea. As December arrived, the days became shorter. Sunset came earlier. Cold winds wrapped themselves around the lonely island. The nights seemed longer than ever. Even the seabirds appeared less often. Still, life inside the lighthouse remained steady. The daily logbook continued to fill with neat handwriting. The weather, the wind, the sea, everything carefully recorded. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that anything was about to change. Yet the Atlantic has always kept its secrets well. Sometimes its calmest days arrive, just before the greatest mysteries begin. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Winter was quietly making its way toward the Flannan Isles.
the search began at first light. Every corner of the island was carefully examined. The steep cliffs, the narrow footpaths, the rocky shoreline below. The men called out again and again. Only the wind answered. There were no footprints leading away from the lighthouse. No signs of a struggle. No damaged equipment. Nothing that clearly explained what had happened. Inside the tower, everything spoke of ordinary life. The beds had been slept in. The kitchen remained neat. The lantern had been prepared with the same care as always. It was as though the keepers had expected to return, only moments later. Investigators turned to the lighthouse logbook. Its pages revealed the weather, the daily duties, and the careful routine that every keeper followed. The final entries suggested that powerful winds and rough seas had swept across the island. Yet when those records were compared with reports from nearby ships, something seemed unusual. Several captains had described calmer conditions during the same period. The difference raised even more questions. Had the weather changed suddenly? Or was there another explanation? One that would never be known. Soon, theories began to spread. Some believed that a towering wave had crashed against the western landing, pulling the men into the freezing Atlantic. Others wondered whether one keeper had gone outside. Another rushed to help, and the third followed without hesitation. It was a simple idea, one built on loyalty and the instinct to protect a friend. There were older stories as well, island legends, whispered from one generation to the next. Some spoke of strange voices carried by the wind. Others believed the lonely cliffs held secrets that the sea refused to surrender. But no evidence ever confirmed those tales. Only silence remained. As weeks became months, the official investigation came to an end. No clear answer was found. No witness stepped forward. No discovery changed the story. The Atlantic kept its secret. And the lighthouse continued to shine across the dark water, night after night, exactly as it always had.
Years passed, then decades. The seasons continued their quiet journey across the North Atlantic. Winter storms came and went. Spring returned with nesting seabirds. Summer covered the cliffs with gentle shades of green. And every evening, as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, the lighthouse came to life once again. Its warm beam reached across the restless sea, just as it always had. New keepers arrived. They climbed the same winding stairs, cleaned the same great lantern, recorded the weather in fresh logbooks, and watched the same endless ocean stretching far beyond the horizon. Life inside the lighthouse continued. But the memory of the 3 missing men never truly faded. Sailors continued to speak of the mystery. Visitors who learned the story often found themselves standing quietly, looking toward the lonely tower and wondering what had happened on that cold December night. Some believed the sea had claimed them. Others believed the truth had simply disappeared with time. And there were those who accepted that some mysteries are never meant to be completely understood. The Atlantic is a place of remarkable beauty, but it is also a place of quiet power. Its waves erase footprints. Its winds carry away voices. And its tides guard their secrets with endless patience. Perhaps that is why the story of the Flannan Isles has never been forgotten. Not because we know what happened, but because we never truly will. The lighthouse itself continued to guide ships for many years. Night after night, storm after storm, its gentle light swept across the darkness, offering comfort to sailors crossing the open sea. It became a symbol of certainty, even while the fate of the men who once cared for that light remained uncertain forever. Today, the islands are still there, lonely, peaceful,
watching over the Atlantic just as they did more than a century ago. The cliffs still face the wind. The waves still rise and fall beneath them. The seabirds still circle high above the rocks. And when evening settles over the ocean, it is easy to imagine a quiet lantern turning somewhere beyond the mist, sending its warm light across the water. A gentle reminder that even in the darkest night, hope can often be found in the smallest light. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the Flannan Isles. Not simply the mystery of 3 men who disappeared, but the quiet comfort of a lighthouse that never stopped guiding others safely home. As the waves continue their endless song and the wind whispers softly across the lonely cliffs, the island keeps its silence. The lighthouse keeps its watch, and the sea keeps its secret. Good night. The mystery of the Flannan Isles has remained unsolved for more than a century. Many have searched for answers. Many have offered theories. Yet the sea has never revealed the truth. Perhaps it never will. And maybe that is why this quiet story continues to capture our imagination. Not because it frightens us, but because it reminds us that the world is still filled with places where mystery and nature quietly exist side by side. Tonight, as you listen to the distant rhythm of the waves, imagine the lighthouse standing alone beneath a sky full of stars, its gentle light turning slowly across the Atlantic, the wind moving softly around the stone tower, the ocean breathing in its endless, peaceful rhythm. Somewhere beyond the darkness, ships continue their journey, guided by a light that has watched over these waters for generations. Whether the truth is ever discovered or not, the lighthouse remains patient, steadfast, silent. If you enjoyed drifting through this forgotten chapter of history, there are many more quiet journeys waiting to be explored. Until then, may your evening be peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. And wherever your own journey leads, may you always find a light to guide you safely home. Good night.